Black homeless boy shouts, "Don't eat that." Billionaire frozen by a shocking truth. A homeless boy shouts across a luxurious cafe, "Don't eat that." Every head turns. The billionaire freezes, his spoon inches from his lips. What could a ragged boy possibly know that might save a powerful man's life? And why would anyone believe him? This is the moment where two worlds collide, where truth fights to be heard, and one small voice changes everything. Homeless boy shouts, "Don't eat that." Billionaire freezes when he finds out why. The winter air carried a biting chill that cut through even the thickest coats, but Malik felt it sharper than most. His hoodie hung loose on his frail shoulders, the fabric threadbare and stained with the dust of too many nights spent on park benches. He pressed his back against the iron fence outside the park cafe, its warmth and golden glow spilling out onto the cobblestone street like an invitation he wasn't meant to accept. Inside, the world felt like another planet. Crystal glasses clinked softly. Waiters in crisp uniforms glided between tables, their trays balanced with precision. The aroma of warm bread and rich espresso floated in the air, mingling with the faint perfume of roses from vases perched on every polished surface. At the heart of this oasis sat Bernard Green, a man whose name carried weight in the city. 72, but still commanding, his presence filled the room like gravity itself. A tailored navy suit hugged his lean frame, gold-rimmed glasses perched perfectly on his nose, catching the sunlight like tiny stars. Across from him sat Marissa, his wife, her beauty so striking it seemed carved for magazine covers. Dark hair framed her flawless face, and diamonds danced on her wrist as she idly scrolled through her phone. But to Malik, none of it seemed real. His stomach clenched in pain, sharp and insistent. It had been nearly 2 days since he'd eaten more than half a stale sandwich. Yet hunger wasn't the only thing pulling his gaze to Bernard's table. Something felt wrong. Marissa leaned forward slightly, her voice low, her expression as soft as velvet. But her eyes, Malik noticed them, were cold, calculating. Bernard glanced down at his phone, distracted, as her hand slipped into her handbag. Malik's breath caught as he watched her fingers close around a small glass vial. No one else saw it. She tilted the vial just enough for a clear liquid to slide into the steaming bowl of soup in front of her husband. Her movements were smooth, almost practiced, the kind of gesture a child wouldn't notice. But Malik did. The soup's surface rippled once, then stilled as she stirred it gently, her painted lips curling into a faint smile. Malik froze, his heart hammering. His hands gripped the cold iron fence so tight his knuckles turned white. Could this be real? Could a woman so perfect, sitting in a place so refined, really be doing what he thought she was doing? "After all the trouble I've gone through," she whispered, her voice too soft for anyone else to hear, "you won't ruin this now." The words sent a chill crawling up Malik's spine. He pressed himself against the fence, his body trembling. His mind screamed at him to turn away, to keep moving, to disappear into the city where no one would notice him. But his eyes stayed locked on Bernard's hand as it lifted the spoon toward his lips. The world slowed. He could almost hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. And then, without thinking, Malik's voice cracked the cafe's polished calm. "Don't eat that." Heads turned, forks froze midair. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. Bernard's spoon hovered inches from his mouth as he looked up, startled, his sharp eyes locking onto the small, trembling boy standing just beyond the patio. The two worlds of a homeless boy and a billionaire at the edge of fate. Malik's life had never been warm, not even as a child. The streets had been his teacher and hunger his constant companion. At just 11 years old, he had already learned how invisible a boy could become in a city too busy to care. People didn't see him. Not really. They saw the tattered hoodie, the worn-out sneakers with holes at the toes, and the skin too dark for them to feel comfortable handing him their leftovers. Once he stood outside a grocery store, his hands tucked into his sleeves for warmth. He'd asked a woman for an apple, just one. She clutched her purse tighter, her face tightening in fear. "Get away from me, boy," she hissed. "Go back to where you came from." Malik had said nothing. He had simply lowered his gaze and stepped aside as her heels clicked against the pavement. The memory stayed with him, like so many others, stitched together in the fabric of his young but weary heart. Inside the park cafe, Bernard Green's life couldn't have been more different. He was a man born into nothing, but he had clawed his way into everything. By his 20s, Bernard had built an empire of steel and glass that touched every corner of the city skyline. To the world, he was the embodiment of success. The waiter approached him now with a bow of the head, placing a fresh glass of sparkling water beside the untouched soup. "Mr. Green," the young man said, his voice soft with respect. "Would you like anything else?" Bernard didn't answer right away. His sharp eyes scanned the menu, but his thoughts were elsewhere. His world had always been about control, controlling markets, controlling people, even controlling his own image. Yet lately he felt the edges of his life fraying. Marissa's smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. The staff whispered behind his back when they thought he wasn't listening. He sighed, a sound no one in the room would dare call weakness. Outside, Malik shifted from foot to foot. The soles of his sneakers scraped against the cold stone as he hugged himself tighter. His dark eyes flicked back to the billionaire, who sat surrounded by luxury yet looked strangely lonely. How could a man with so much look like he carried the same emptiness Malik felt every night? His stomach growled, loud enough to make him flinch. "I just want to eat," he whispered to himself. But then his gaze returned to Marissa's hand, still resting casually on the table. He could almost feel the weight of the glass vial she had held minutes earlier. His heart pounded harder. Should he say something? Would they even listen to a boy like him? "They never listen," he muttered bitterly, remembering the night he had cried out for help when an older boy tried to steal his blanket. No one had come. No one ever came. Bernard lifted his spoon, the steam curling like delicate fingers toward his face. "Marissa," he said, his voice smooth but edged with suspicion. "You've been quiet all morning." She smiled, a picture of elegance, and reached across the table to brush his hand. "You worked too hard, darling. Today, let's just enjoy lunch." Malik watched, his fists clenching. His mind screamed at him to speak, to warn the man inside. But his fear was louder. Would they believe him? Or would they see only what they wanted, a dirty black boy interrupting their perfect world? But then a single thought cut through the noise in his head. If I don't say something, he might die. The moment of truth. A homeless boy faces an impossible choice. Malik's breath fogged in the cold air as he gripped the iron railing tighter, his fingers stiff from the chill. But it wasn't the cold that made him shiver. It was the sight of Marissa's delicate hand hovering over Bernard's soup, her movements as smooth as silk, as if she had done this before. The vial was so small, it seemed almost harmless. A clear liquid dripped silently into the creamy broth. 1, 2, 3 drops, and then it was gone. The surface of the soup rippled once before settling into perfect stillness, as though nothing had happened. Malik's stomach twisted in knots. Did I just see that? He blinked, rubbing his eyes with the back of his sleeve, but when he looked again, Marissa was already stirring the bowl gently, her face calm, her smile sweet. "After all I've done for you," she whispered, her voice low but sharp enough for Malik to hear from where he stood. "You won't ruin this now." Her words slithered through the air like poison themselves. Bernard glanced at her briefly, distracted, then back at his phone. He was scrolling through emails, completely unaware of the danger sitting inches from his lips. Malik's heart thundered so hard he could feel it in his throat. His legs felt like stone, his instincts screaming at him to turn and run. This isn't my problem, he thought. If I walk away, no one will ever know I was here. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. He would know. He would remember every detail, the way her fingers tightened around the vial, the sound of her voice, the casual cruelty in her eyes. His mind spun with fear. Who's going to believe me? I'm just a dirty black kid in an old hoodie. To them, I don't exist. If I say something, they'll think I'm trying to steal or worse. He pictured Marissa turning on him, her voice sharp and filled with disgust. Who let this boy in here? Someone call security. Malik swallowed hard. His palms were sweating despite the cold. But then his gaze landed on Bernard. The man looked tired, older somehow than a moment ago, his strong hands trembling slightly as he reached for the spoon. Malik didn't know him, didn't owe him anything, but something inside him burned hot with anger. Anger at a world where people like Marissa could smile so sweetly while hiding venom behind their lips. Anger at himself for even considering staying silent. Bernard lifted the spoon. Steam curled lazily upward, carrying the scent of herbs and cream. His hand steadied as he brought it closer to his mouth. Malik's body moved before his mind caught up. His feet slammed against the stone as he darted forward, the railing clattering loudly behind him. His voice tore out of his throat, raw and desperate. Don't eat that. Every head in the cafe turned. Forks froze midair. A glass slipped from a waitress's hand, shattering against the polished floor. Bernard's spoon hovered inches from his lips as his eyes locked on the small, trembling figure standing just outside the patio. Marissa spun around, her flawless face tightening into something sharp and dangerous. What did you just say? she demanded, her voice slicing through the stunned silence. Malik's legs felt like lead, but his voice didn't falter this time. She put something in your soup, he said, his words shaking but loud enough for everyone to hear. I saw her, don't eat it. Gasps rippled through the cafe like a sudden gust of wind. Bernard lowered the spoon slowly, his sharp gaze flicking between Malik and his wife. Marissa, he said calmly, though there was a new edge in his tone. What's he talking about? Marissa's lips curled into a smile, but her eyes flashed cold. He's lying. He's just some street rat looking for attention. Her voice dripped with venom now, louder than before. Bernard, don't listen to him. But Malik didn't back down. I'm not lying, he said, stepping closer. I saw her. She poured something in when you weren't looking. If you don't believe me, smell it. The air in the cafe grew heavy. Every pair of eyes locked on the unfolding drama. The shocking confrontation. A homeless boy exposes a billionaire's secret. The cafe fell silent. Every clink of silverware, every hum of polite conversation evaporated in an instant as Malik's voice sliced through the golden air. Don't eat that. Bernard froze, the spoon suspended inches from his lips. His sharp eyes narrowed, locking onto the boy standing just beyond the patio railing. Marissa whipped her head around so fast her diamond earrings swung wildly. The mask of elegance she wore so effortlessly cracked for a split second, her lips tightening into a thin, sharp line. What did you just say? Her voice was low and icy, each word like a blade gliding across glass. Malik's legs trembled, but he didn't look away. She put something in your soup, he said, his voice shaking yet steady enough for everyone in the room to hear. I saw her, don't eat it. Gasps rippled across the cafe like the first rumble of a storm. A waiter dropped a glass, and the shattering sound rang out, loud and cruel. Bernard slowly set the spoon down on the table, his hand calm but his fingers twitching ever so slightly. His gaze shifted between his wife and the boy, sharp enough to pierce steel. Marissa, he said, his tone quiet but heavy, what is he talking about? Marissa let out a short, brittle laugh, one that didn't reach her eyes. Bernard, he's lying, look at him. She gestured toward Malik with a flick of her manicured fingers. He's just some filthy street kid trying to get attention. This is ridiculous. But Bernard didn't move. His eyes narrowed further, scanning her face for the truth. Malik's heart thudded painfully in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to disappear into the streets where no one would remember him. But then Bernard's spoon flashed in his mind again, hovering over the poisoned soup. I'm not lying, Malik said louder now, his voice firmer despite the tremor in his hands. I saw her. She poured something into your soup when you weren't looking. You can smell it if you don't believe me. Marissa slammed her hands on the table, the sound sharp and jarring in the hushed cafe. This is absurd. She barked, her voice trembling with rage. He's making it up. Bernard, you can't seriously think I'd ever. Enough. Bernard's voice was soft, but carried a weight that silenced her instantly. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, his piercing eyes fixed on her. You've been acting strange for weeks now, he said quietly, and now this. The tension in the room thickened. Patrons leaned closer, some clutching their phones to record, others whispering furiously behind raised menus. Marissa's face hardened, her perfect smile now gone, replaced with something sharper and darker. This is insane, she hissed. Why are you listening to him? He's nobody. Maybe, Bernard said slowly, his tone like a blade being drawn from its sheath. But sometimes it takes a nobody to see what those closest to you are hiding. Malik stood frozen, unsure if he should speak again or let the man's words sink in. The waiter approached cautiously, his eyes wide. Sir, he said softly, should I call someone, the police maybe? The suggestion sent a ripple through the crowd. Marissa's eyes widened slightly, a flash of panic breaking through her icy exterior. No, she snapped. No one is calling anyone. This is just a misunderstanding. Bernard, please listen to me. But Bernard's eyes never left hers. Why are you so afraid of the truth, Marissa? Malik's voice cracked the silence again, firmer this time. Call someone to test the soup, he said. You're rich, you can afford that, but don't eat it. Please. Bernard stared at the boy, seeing not a ragged hoodie or dirty shoes, but a courage so rare it stunned him into silence. Who are you, kid? Bernard asked softly. Malik swallowed hard. I'm someone who didn't want to watch you die. Justice unfolds. A boy's courage forces the truth into the light. The sound of sirens sliced through the hushed air like a warning bell. Inside the cafe, no one moved. The waiters stood frozen, clutching their trays as if one wrong step would shatter the fragile moment. Patrons whispered in tight clusters, their eyes darting between the billionaire, his stunning wife, and the trembling boy whose voice had turned their elegant world upside down. Marissa's diamond bracelet glinted as her hands tightened around her designer handbag. Her perfect face was pale now, the mask of calm slipping like melting wax. "Bernard, please," she said, her voice soft but edged with panic. "Don't do this. Don't let them humiliate me over a filthy little liar." But Bernard didn't respond. His eyes, once warm and trusting, had hardened to cold steel. He sat unmoving, his fingers tracing the edge of the soup bowl with mechanical precision. The glass doors opened with a rush of cold air, and two uniformed police officers strode inside. Their boots clacked sharply against the marble floor. "Who called us?" one asked, scanning the room. The waiter stepped forward nervously, his voice shaking. "Over here, officers, the gentleman at the center table." Bernard stood slowly. Even in the presence of the law, he exuded the quiet authority of a man used to being in command. "Officers," he said, his tone calm but laced with gravity. "This boy claims my wife tried to poison me. I'd like you to test this soup." Marissa let out a harsh laugh, the sound brittle and cracking at the edges. "You can't be serious. This is insane. Bernard, you're really letting some street rat dictate your life." The officers exchanged glances. One stepped forward, kneeling to sniff the bowl. "Ma'am," the taller officer said, his tone neutral but firm, "do you have anything to say about this accusation before we proceed?" Marissa's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted wildly, first to Bernard, then to the officers, and finally to Malik, who stood a few steps away, his small fists clenched tightly. For a moment she looked like she might spin another web of lies. But then, something in Bernard's expression stopped her cold. It wasn't anger she saw there, it was disappointment. Her shoulders sagged as her polished exterior crumbled. "Fine," she spat, her voice low but venomous. "You want the truth? I'm sick of living in his shadow, sick of being nothing but his trophy. He wasn't supposed to make it this far. I was supposed to be free." Gasps rippled through the café like a wave. Bernard's face went pale, his hand gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for attempted murder," the officer said firmly. "Place your hands where I can see them." "No," Marissa shrieked, trying to pull away as they gripped her wrists and snapped the cuffs in place. "You don't understand. He deserved it. All of this should have been mine." Her voice echoed off the marble walls as the officers led her through the café, her designer heels scraping loudly against the floor. The crowd parted in silence, some with pity in their eyes, others with judgment. Bernard sank back into his chair, his chest rising and falling heavily. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then his gaze drifted to Malik. The boy hadn't moved. He stood frozen, as if unsure whether to stay or run. "You saved my life," Bernard said quietly. His voice was steady, but his eyes glistened with something Malik had never seen before in a man so powerful. Gratitude. I just couldn't walk away," Malik murmured. Bernard studied him for a long moment. "Most people would have," he said, "but not you. A homeless boy's bravery changes his life forever." The café had returned to a fragile calm. The murmur of voices slowly rose as patrons began to process what they had just witnessed. Marissa's screams had faded into the distance, swallowed by the hum of the waiting police car outside. But at the center table, Bernard sat still, his gold-rimmed glasses resting on the table beside him. He wasn't the same man who had walked into the café an hour ago. He was quieter now, his shoulders heavy, his eyes searching for answers in the steaming bowl of soup he would never touch. Across from him, Malik shifted nervously on his feet. His small hands tugged at the frayed hem of his hoodie, his wide eyes unsure if he was about to be thanked or thrown out. "Sit down, son." The words were so soft, Malik almost didn't hear them. He froze, his voice caught in his throat. "Me?" he asked cautiously. Bernard nodded, his hand gesturing to the chair across from him. "Yes, you." Malik hesitated, his legs stiff as stone, then moved slowly toward the seat. He perched on the edge, ready to spring up if someone came to drag him away. "You didn't have to do what you did," Bernard said, his voice low and steady. "But you did. You stood up in a room full of people who would have ignored you. You saved my life." Malik looked down at the table, his fingers gripping his knees. I couldn't let it happen," he murmured. "I know what it feels like when no one listens." Bernard studied him closely. For the first time, he didn't see a street kid with dirt on his cheeks and shoes worn to threads. He saw a boy with more courage than most men he'd ever known. "How long have you been out there?" Bernard asked gently. Malik's shoulders stiffened. "A while," he whispered. "After my mom passed, there wasn't anywhere to go. I tried shelters, but they were full, so I stayed outside." Bernard's chest tightened. He had built skyscrapers and bought entire city blocks, yet here was a child the world had forgotten. "You're not staying out there anymore," Bernard said firmly. Malik's head shot up, his eyes wide. "What?" "You're coming with me. We'll get you cleaned up, fed, and somewhere safe to sleep tonight. After that, we'll figure things out together." Malik's lips parted, but no sound came. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. "I don't need your money," Malik said quickly, his voice defensive. "I didn't do this for—" "I know you didn't." Bernard interrupted softly. "That's why I want to help you." For the first time in years, Malik felt something unfamiliar blooming in his chest. Warmth, hope. "Why?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Bernard's eyes softened. "Because someone like you shouldn't have to fight this world alone." The cafe's quiet murmur faded as the two sat in silence, sunlight spilling across the table like a gentle blessing. Around them, people began to rise and leave, but several paused to glance at Malik. No longer just a ragged boy outside their window, but the kid who had stopped a murder in plain sight. Bernard stood and held out his hand. "Come on, son, let's get you home." Malik hesitated, then placed his small, cold hand into Bernard's warm, steady grip. As they walked out of the cafe together, the air seemed lighter somehow, as if the city itself was holding its breath, watching a new story begin. Sometimes it only takes one brave voice to change a life. Sometimes it's not the powerful who save the world. It's the quiet, overlooked souls who find the courage to speak up when no one else will. Malik's story reminds us that even in a world that tries to silence the weak, one voice can change everything. It calls us to see the unseen, to believe in the worth of every human life, and to never underestimate the strength of a kind heart. What about you? What would you have done in Malik's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your voice. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to Black Unbreakable for more powerful stories that celebrate courage, dignity, and hope. In our next videos, we'll uncover more untold stories about the struggles, injustice, and the breathtaking victories of African descendants in modern society. These are the stories of resilience and unbreakable spirit you've never heard before, stories that just might change how you see the world.